Okay, great. All right, so we're here today with Ted O'Connell, and Ted is the winner of the Tobias Wolff Award in fiction. He's a writer and a musician whose creative products have been featured in literary magazines, taverns, music halls throughout the country. And he's in fact visited over 30 countries and has twice served as a visiting professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University in China. And from that experience arose his first novel, K, published last year by Santa Fe Writers Project. And the New York Journal of Books wrote that even in the darkest sections, Ted O'Connell's debut novel is upbeat, witty, and full of ideas about art, reality, truth, identity, fate, language, and the rise of China on the world stage. Ted, welcome to Literary Traveler. We're excited to have you here.
Hey, it's good to be here. You got a great website. What a cool concept.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty neat, and the great thing about it is it puts us in touch with cool and interesting people that have great ideas and great stories to tell. And so I would put you in that category. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your book? And I want everyone to know that you have an article on the site, and just give us a little bit of background, how it came to be, and maybe a little about the article that you wrote for us.
Sure. Well, the book is called K. It's the letter K,
Mhm.
and it's about a guy named Francis Kaufman. It's finally nice to meet a guy named Francis, who is he's basically it's an expat book. He's an expat. He's lived in China for 10 years, and he speaks really great Chinese, which I didn't. I tried, but it's nice to make your character speak great Chinese. But anyway, he's kind of in exile from the United States and from his overbearing father. So that's why he's in China. And he really wants to be a writer. And he's too wimpy to tell his father, I want to be a writer. So he sneaks out to China and becomes a writer. But basically, he has to work in business to make a living, and then switches to a job at a university. He incites some of his students to political dissent. They get hauled off by the secret police. Then he gets hauled off. Boom, he's in prison. So he's the only foreigner in a prison with 7 other cellmates. And it's a prison like no other. It's a really weird, kind of surreal place, and so he has to try to get out of there.
Wow. So I'm curious a little bit. How did you research that? And as far as I'm reading the book now, and it's compelling in the scenes, in just the dynamics between everyone. How did you research that the prison setting?
Well, I actually did very little research on prisons. I had to do a bunch of research on like multinational corporations and shadow banking and that sort of thing. Some of the things that also get him in trouble unwittingly. But the prison, which is where the book started in terms of where it came in my notebook, I really wanted that to be a product of the imagination. I didn't want to be the kind of writer that researches a bunch on prison and then tries to make it some facsimile of reality, and then be, as I'm writing, looking over my shoulder the whole time, like, did I get it right? Did I get it right? So for me, I think that was a good call. It's much more actually authentic and true if it comes from the imagination. And then I did go back and look at a few things, and it turns out some of the things I imagined actually were sort of true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely a hard thing to capture, and I think you do it well. You also talk about teaching in the book. What was that like, teaching in China, and tell us more about that.
Well, that was great. It was really fun. I mean, I loved my students, and I really felt like my students liked me, which is, I think in any teaching situation, that's kind of what you want, right? It was just fun. I mean, I taught business English. I knew nothing about business, but they just kind of throw you in there like, okay, teach business English to these really, really incredibly smart sophomores at Beijing Foreign Studies University. And keep in mind, this is a top university. If you just do the math, anything math related in China, when you're talking about numbers of people, is crazy. So these are elite students. This is like, teaching at, Brown or Yale or something like that. And I was kind of a goofball in class, and I think the students liked that. It was a little different than their, normal experience. And then the teaching load was about half of what it is for me in the States. So basically it's like a part-time job with full-time pay, and I get to travel when I'm not working and like explore Beijing all the time with my family. So it was, yeah, it was really fun. And the people were just like super sweet, really nice.
And what were there certain restrictions on and I don't want to give anything away, but your like you mentioned, your the character, the main character in the book is a teacher, and he might, you know, bend the rules a little bit. And I'm just curious, was that hard to teach? Were there restrictions placed on you about the things you could talk about?
You know, it's not like we got a piece of paper from the administrator saying don't talk about these things, but it was kind of like the word on the street among the teachers was like, don't talk about the three T's, don't talk about Taiwan, Tibet, or Tiananmen. So it's, you know, it's kind of like, it's like you're a guest in somebody's house and
Yeah,
say that, you know, there's a divorce or something. Well, you know, and it's like, it's kind of, you're not going to talk about the divorce unless it's appropriate, whatever it is. You know, I'm a guest. It's their country. You just kind of know, you know, don't be an asshole.
yeah,
Don't be a jerk. Don't talk about certain things. And yeah, I mean, you'd be kind of, um, you wouldn't be real smart to talk about certain things. Um, that being said, there were times where you just kind of, it's really easy to wade into free speech areas, or, you know, you start talking about something about Mao Zedong that he did in, you know, in the Great Leap Forward, and, you know, having everyone melt down pots and pans, and you're getting into a little bit of a sensitive area. And so there were times like that in class. I noticed you had James Baldwin on your site. I brought on a James Baldwin quote one time, and students were kind of having at it, and it was all about criticizing their country. And I was a little bit like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't
yeah,
go there. So
yeah.
it's kind of just a understood, don't talk about X, Y, and Z.
Right, right. So in that climate, I think you mentioned in some of my I saw in some of my notes in your article you mentioned that uh, Kafka dominated your thoughts while you were there, and I wonder if you can maybe set the stage for that and talk more about how Kafka plays into this and how he inspired you in a certain sense.
Yeah, I mean, that was just the 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 fact. I couldn't stop thinking of Kafka when I was in China because I'm a big fan. I've, you know, read most of everything he's done, and I'd be walking through China and I'd see all these like gates and doors, and Kafka was big on gates and doors. And I remember a student saying to me one time, sort of in a pleasant, quiet voice, she was like, "If there's a door in China, it shall be locked." Like the idea, like, and you know, you'd see fire doors with chains around the handles, like, you know, because someone's like, "I don't want these people to get out." And that to me seemed kind of crazy and Kafka-esque and, you know, absurd, you know, that they would lock a fire door. Um, the security guards everywhere, and just like the kind of middling bureaucrats like that were just everywhere. In every building you walk in, there's someone with a uniform or at a desk, and their job, they don't appear to be doing anything. You know, so
Yeah,
this is kind of farce or this kind of absurdity. um, or even I'd studied a fair amount of the history of China. You get like the terracotta warriors, you know, the first emperor of China in 200 BCE buries himself with like 800 clay warriors to bring him into the afterlife, or the Cultural Revolution or the Great Leap Forward, just, you know, absurd, you know, inversions of power structure where, you know, middle schoolers are tossing, you know, eggs at teachers with dunce hats. So, I mean, for me, Kafka's always about the absurd.
yeah,
And or just even in China, going to, my wife said it was like, it's kind of like, you know, when you go through customs and you're kind of like, I've got my papers, I didn't do anything wrong, but you still feel nervous. And you're like, that person in that uniform has like power over me. Like something could go wrong. And it was, I felt like that often in China with, like, you know, some document I needed to get my license to teach or my medical forms filled out or something, like, just that I'm part of this, I'm this little pawn in the bureaucracy. And if that person behind the desk wants to, you know, tell me I'm not going, then I'm not going. You know.
yeah. And in reading the main character in the story, you get this sense, or at least I got it, that he's kind of unwittingly just kind of heading in a certain direction with the way he teaches and the way he kind of, it seems like he's not, he's teaching things he shouldn't be. I mean, not that he shouldn't be teaching them, but that there's a real risk. So you're kind of up against that system. So in a way, you describe it. I think it sounds Kafka-esque. Is there one thing that stands out as the most and the most Kafka-esque element of your experience there?
Well, nothing, really, really bad happened to me in terms of, I mean, I didn't get thrown into a prison. There, part of the story came from a guy that did get thrown in prison, a Westerner that got in a street fight or something like that. I think um, this is on NPR a couple years ago. He got in a street fight and he got put in a special prison with, other Chinese, nationals, and he was the only American in the prison. And he described sort of like having fun with these guys, actually. Like after a while, like it was like, what else are you going to do? You're going to start laughing, even though they didn't even speak the same language. So that idea, that seems to me sort of Kafkaesque. In terms of my life, I mean, nothing really bad happened, but just weird things would happen. Like, I remember I'm a musician, right? But I have to say, I don't have a thing for Peking opera. These operas take like 4 hours, right? And I remember just being sort of like invited to this opera and I was just stuck there. So even just being there, it just started to seem kind of absurd. Um, Gosh, I remember thinking I lost my camera once and enlisting all these people's help and walking through all these basements and stuff. And I came back and my camera was under my desk at home. Um, I think when you travel and you have jet lag, you get those first 3 days, you're just kind of foggy.
Yeah.
So I think that almost sort of would feel Kafkaesque or something because you're kind of half almost dreamy. You're up when you shouldn't be. Or just the fact that there'd be gates everywhere. There are walls around the university, and like, why do I have to go through this gate to get to school? And so it's just little things, repeated little things, and I would just be like thinking like, oh, that'd be like in a Kafka story. That guy, in the story Before the Law, where there's a official standing outside the door to the law, like who has all this power, but he seems to have none.
Right, right. And I imagine that must be magnified if that sensibility you have as a writer and that influence is combined and you're in that place and all these things you're observing and you're maybe taking mental notes.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that must all be magnified.
Well, and
And
just the fact too that like, I mean, I would read about, I'd read about people who'd be hauled off of the secret police, and I knew it would happen. And you can imagine, like, gosh, if I said the wrong thing, it'd be pretty easy for me to get hauled off. Like, I mean, the justice system there is pretty much if you just disturb social order, that's all they have on you. That's all they need.
right, right.
So I would be aware of that. I guess.
So you mentioned it's interesting. I thought about this in reading the book. The the main character is writing in his head,
Yeah.
correct? And and that was fascinating because I can conceive of that, but then again, I don't know if um I could do that. And so that to me was very um interesting and compelling at the same time. And did you like when did you get the idea for the novel? Was it you said did you think I'm going to go and I'm going to write over here, or did it kind of come to you and give a sense of the germination of everything?
Well, I would force myself to write a couple hours a day, a certain number of days a week. I can't remember. And I had this like really kind of Spartan, dusty office that they gave me on the 5th floor of this building. And there's no elevators; you have to walk way up. And I was just doing my writing one day, and I think this is the notebook I was using. I have a fetish for notebooks. I love these notebooks you can buy in China. They're beautiful. And I think I was just scribbling away one day, and I think I just wrote in the notebooks like, what if I wrote a story? I used the word story. I didn't think novel at that time. I was like, what if I wrote a story about a professor that kind of says too much and kind of crosses the line politically and gets hauled off, you know, by the authorities. And then I was like, then there's, and then the notebook, there's this pause, and then I just wrote a first line, you know, and I imagined, okay, if he was in prison, he'd want to write, still want to write. But in this prison, I don't know how this came, you know, when what started, but in this prison, there's no art allowed at all. That, you know, there's some propaganda, but there's no forms of art at all. And so they give him no pen, no ink. And so that to me is like, that'd be torture. Like if I couldn't read or couldn't write, I mean, I've imagined like, oh, if I was in prison, as long as I had books, I'd be fine. I mean, I know it's a really naive attitude, but I've always thought that. Hey, man, if I had books and writing utensils, I could handle that. You know, I'm tough. But now I imagine, again, I don't know. I must have just imagined what would be terrible. It could be terrible not to have books, not to have writing utensils. Like that'd be horrible. So yeah, he tries to. The guy tries to write by memory, which you know is obviously really really hard to do.
Yeah, yeah. Tell us a little more about the main character of the book. Um,
Yeah. Um, well, his name, you know, his name is Francis Kaufman, and his dad once says to him like, "I should have named you Frank," and that's like a real punch in the face to this guy, right? But he's a complicated character in that you know some people are bugged by him, or they bug him. He's frustrating for some people because he can be very pleasant. He does his job well. He connects with the students, but he has trouble with intimacy. So if you imagine a character like that just doesn't, it's not his thing. He's not very intimate with people. Like it's cool. Um, you know that that's kind of part of his jam, right? But he's got this overbearing father who's a big shot insurance salesman. So he's always felt kind of inadequate. And his dad has pushed him into business. Like, you know, you're gonna take on the family company, and he makes him go to you know, makes him go to business school. But he's like, all right, Dad, I'll go to business school if you let me go to, you know, literature, study literature for a couple of years. Like, fine, they make a deal. The dad loses his shirt in the 2008 recession. The company just goes, psh, and the only way to save the company is basically the Chinese come in and kind of take part of the company and resuscitate it. But the deal is they want Francis to come and help, you know, work there because they want a Westerner to help give them kind of Western ideas about marketing and stuff. So Francis has to like care for his parents in a sense, which is exactly like Gregor in the Metamorphosis. Okay, like the family leeches on this guy. So Francis, you know, he goes to China. He speaks excellent Chinese because he studied there as a kid. He's kind of one of these, you know, Chinophiles in a sense, like a lot of people I met in China, you know, the expats that live there. And just as an aside, like I would always wonder, like, why are these people like they've been in China for 15 years or 10 years? Like, why do people become expats? And in some sense, you always wonder, like, are they hiding from something, or are they really just finding their best selves in this foreign country, like their parent country? So there's kind of like dynamics of that, like, you know, who is he? Why is he in China? Um, and you know, can he become a writer? You know, he decides he wants to write, you know, and that's what he's going to do. And he quits the business. Um, and unfortunately, you know, in his teaching, he kind of goes too far, inspires some students to political dissent. But the students have their own reasons for dissenting because, like, they're, like in one case, a student had her family's hotel just completely bulldozed by the government, where they built a highway, and there was like no compensation for the father. So this kid is frustrated. She speaks out and gets hauled off. So there's Francis Kaufman in a cell with 8 or 7 other men, and he pretends not to speak Chinese, even though he's Chinese is excellent. You know, that's the thing about making a character is you can make him a lot smarter than yourself, but he's also a lot more neurotic.
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of his thing. But you know, he comes to see these people as his brothers eventually. You know, he's real cool in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of like, I think you might have mentioned in that was the book is scheduled to come out soon, but was it scheduled to come out last year? Talk about what's that like launching a book
Yeah,
during
and actually,
pandemic? Because I imagine you
it's already
connect.
out.
Yeah. Okay.
It's already out. It came out in May
Okay.
of 2020. So that was, yeah, that was it's frustrating because I had like 20 readings lined up. You know, but so is every other author, you know. I'm a lucky person altogether. I haven't gotten the disease, and everyone in my
Yep.
family's safe. So it's just one of those things. We're products of history, and just bad luck for me this particular year. But uh, I'll get my shots, and I'll hit the road again and get out there and read the book, because I love to be in front of audiences and share the book with people.
Yeah. Do you miss that chance? I imagine a lot to connect with readers, right? To
Yeah.
sort of see their feedback and to hear their own imagination take over your characters and give you feedback.
Yeah, I've had a couple book clubs. I did one socially distant in the summer outside of by the shores of a lake. It was really nice. We all were spread out, and I had a microphone, and that was like, God, that was like oxygen, man. To be, with people and have them talk about the book, and it is kind of, to be frank, it's kind of a good book club book, because it is, for a lot of people, they're kind of like, do I want to read about a guy in prison? They may be like, I don't know if I feel like reading that today. But then once they start reading it, at least as far as I know, unless people are lying to me, they're like, wow, I'm kind of into this more than I thought. So it's
Yeah.
it's a good book club book in that sense. And I did a Zoom book club kind of thing and got to talk to people just like I'm talking to you here on Zoom. So
Yeah. Yeah. That
all right, better
that's
than being in prison.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, I guess. One of the cool things that we've gotten to do over the years is we might have like an organized literary tour or trip, and a few people go and they have like reading materials or a reading list, and then there's like an organized book discussion. And that seems like this could lend itself well to that. And I could see you in China leading a trip. Um, but one thing with a book like this, and this, uh, can you go back to China with a book like this, or would you get? Um,
Well, I suspect I'm still flying under the radar of the Chinese government. Just
okay,
that much. But like, yeah, I mean, if the book blew up or something, or got made into a movie or something like that, then maybe it's a little bit. I don't know. I should know the answer to that question a little bit better, but I suspect they leave. Um, they leave they leave foreigners alone as long as they're not in China, causing problem. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, um, there's plenty of people more powerful than I am, that and more controversial than me, that have gone to China, and as long as they keep their mouth shut while they're there, that's probably all good.
yeah, yeah. What's your impression of your overall impression of China when you take a step back and think about it?
Well, I mean, I think I want to preface everything I've said about China with like I don't want to be included in those folks around this country now that are spewing out all this anti-Asian sentiment, the Wuhan flu kind of stuff like that. I mean, I want to separate that. There's a lot of racist stuff going on against Asian folks, as we know, in this country. So if I'm critical of China, that's not that's not where I'm coming from at all.
Right.
I think I'm critical of my own country. I mean, James Baldwin, I saw he was on your website. That was a really cool little spot there by Hannah White. I think James Baldwin was the one who said, "I love my country more than any other country. I love America more than any other country on the planet, and for this reason, I reserve the right to criticize her perpetually." And that's the quote that I brought into my class one day of my Chinese students. I brought this Baldwin quote, and they changed America to China in the middle of their sentence, like they wanted the right to criticize China. So there is always that sense among Chinese, and I know I'm getting a little off track here, that quietly they will criticize their country, but then publicly, of course, they can't. They got to be really careful.
Yeah.
But in terms of like, China's a fascinating place. I can't really put it into a short answer, but I think, like with a lot of countries, you love the people, and there are things the government that you do that you hate. I mean, if you know what's going on in Xinjiang province right now, I mean, it is bad. They are
Right.
taking people, who identify as Muslim, and they're throwing them in prison. And there was a really good story done. I want to say it was in the Believer, I think. A guy who'd lived there for a while did some really, really, really good reporting on what's going on there. Um, So yeah, or even the way that the doctor, I mean, obviously China's handled the pandemic way, way better than we have by, orders of magnitude, but initially they screwed it up, right? We know that. I mean, there was the doctor in Wuhan who said, hey, I think this might be a SARS virus. And because the authorities wanted to keep things quiet, they told him to shut up, and he ended up even getting the virus and dying. So when you hear about that kind of stuff, it makes you angry, right? Just like
Right.
with your own country, like as Baldwin says, we criticize our own country. So I would describe my relationship with China as love-hate. There's things that and again, I'm a privileged American. There's things that would be going on there. I'd be like, even the bureaucracy, I'd be like, oh, this is so dumb. And then at times I'd be like, I love this place, love the food, love the architecture and the history. And so, yeah, love, hate is probably the quickest way I could say it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that I think is very true. I think a lot of people will feel that way about where they're from. But one question about traveling, and you mentioned this in your article that you wrote for us. Why is it so important for people to travel? I know it's an obvious question, but I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, and I'm regretting to say my answer is not super brilliant or creative. It's pretty simple. We went to China with our daughter when she was 6, and then another time when she was 9. And I think about when you grow up, if you've never gone to another country, if you've only seen people of your own country, or even if as a white person, if you mainly hang around white people, when you see on the news, say, oh, this tragedy in blah, blah, blah country, there's an earthquake in, somewhere in, Kenya or something like that, or there's a flood in India. If you grew up white in the racial waters of this country, and you see people of color and they look different, they're going to look other to you. They're not going to seem fully human. But when you travel, and even though you're privileged and this sort of thing, I mean, the fact that my daughter went to a Chinese school for part of the time and, played with Chinese kids and the folks you see can't help but be more fully human, as they ought to be, right? So I think when you travel, you do, I'm not trying to overemphasize and say that like it makes you, a better person or more moral or kind of cures your racism, whatever it is you have. But I think it cannot help. I cannot help but help, that sort of thing. You see people as more fully human, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a nice way to put it. Where, if you had your druthers, where would you be off to next for your next adventure?
Well, we've not gone to India. India is definitely a place that we want to, cross off our list for sure. South America, like the Patagonia, or Chile and Argentina. I love wine, so I'd love to go to Argentina and hike up into the mountains and have a good steak and some wine for sure. But yeah, that's one of the things I mentioned in the article too. Like, man, in these times where traveling seems so much more precious than ever. And that's one of the things I think is kind of neat about your site. I'm sure a lot of people are vicariously traveling by, clicking on all the good stories that you have, about the woman in Steinbeck's cabin or.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot for a literary traveler. There's a lot there because, like you mentioned in the interview and in the article, or I just get the sense that your mind as a writer is thinking of what you're taking notes on what you see and you're writing in your head, but then you're using all your influences at the same time. And very often being in that place or setting makes it all kind of come to life.
Yeah.
Imagination. So
something you said reminds me too, like there are excuses to travel too, because the book I'm working on right now involves a young woman who's 17 who finds a passport on a German hiker who's died in the Montana wilderness. And she's kind of the main character is kind of thinking about skipping the country sometime anyway, because she's very, very frustrated with her parents who've cheated to get her in college. And she finds this passport and she kind of like takes it. And then she has this opportunity to be somebody else. So she goes to Germany and tries to live with this life of this German girl who's a couple years older than her. So I'm hoping next summer, I say to my wife, we got to go to Germany, Julie. I got to research, so it's like, I'm hoping that things will open up next summer and I'll get to
Yeah.
Berlin and Cologne and places like that.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Ted, for the time for the interview. I think it was great for readers to get to know you a little bit, and thanks for your article. And I think your book is fabulous. And I think we want to let everybody know about it. And I hope that really does well.
Hey, I appreciate it. Let me just show everyone what it looks like so they can remember the title. There's Prison Bars, Red Cave. Good luck with the site. I think it's a really, really neat site. So keep up the good work, and it's really nice meeting you.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you so much. And where can people get the book? On Amazon?
They can get it on Amazon, or they could go directly to the website of the publisher, which is Santa Fe Writers Project. But most people probably just remember Amazon, and that's just fine.
Okay. Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Ted. Appreciate your time.
Good to meet you, Francis. Thank you.